Brooks Lee moved to Buies Creek when he was just 5 years old after his father, Billy Lee, was named head basketball coach in 1985. Raised in the creek, it's not surprising that Brooks followed his dad, bouncing a basketball all the while, except when his dad was talking in practice. A North Carolina East-West All-Star Game selection after graduating from Harnett Central High School, Brooks began his collegiate career at High Point before transferring back home after 2 seasons. He concluded his career as a point guard in the gym where he grew up, earned his sport management degree, and began his graduate work. Brooks followed his father into coaching before leaving the profession and getting into business with his cousin Garrett, who played college basketball at ECU. While he's lived away from Buies Creek for more than 2 decades, he's always come back to visit. My name is Stan Cole, class of 1987, and this is the next installment of Tales from the Creek, where we visit with people who have made this place special over the years. I'm delighted to be joined today by former Campbell basketball standout Brooks Lee. Welcome to Tales from the Creek, Brooks, and thanks for taking the time to visit with us.
Thanks, Dan. Standout is a pretty generous term there, but I will definitely take it. But it's good to see you again, and thanks for having me on.
So, Brooks, let's just start at the beginning. What are you able to recall from when you were and your family moved to Buies Creek when you were around 5 years old?
Yeah, so I was born in Lumberton, North Carolina, and Dad was at the time the coach at Pembroke State. I guess now it's University of Pembroke or Pembroke University now, or UNCP. We were there for maybe a year and then came on to the creek, and that's where I grew up. And really what I remember about Buies Creek are all the great things that have made me the person that I am. And that's a lot of contribution from a lot of people in that community. The church I grew up in at Memorial Baptist Church, and just the people in that community helped raise me. And it's just a special place to live. And as the older I get, the more I really appreciate that community and where I lived and how I grew up. Grateful for it.
We moved out to Keith Hills in 2015, and we walk our daughter, Catherine, her dog, around the loop all the time. And I go by the house where you grew up all the time, and I sit there and I think to myself, how awesome it must have been to be in a neighborhood and there's kids around and stuff like that. I mean, what did you do? I mean, obviously you bounced a basketball a lot, but what did the day look like, say, after school when you were grade school age?
We did everything. Everything from backyard basketball games. We played football in the fairway. We used the rough as our touchdowns. Cat Up Church did not enjoy that very much. For those of you that remember him, we got a few visits to the house on that. We would ride our bikes a lot, skateboard. We'd go fishing in the ponds around the course. Really, we were just outside and hanging with our buddies. And at the time, you don't think that that's special and you don't think anything of it, but we couldn't wait to get out of school and get home and see what we're going to do.
Who were some of the kids you were running around with and back then?
So Ben Thomas was my next door neighbor,
right,
and best friend at the time, and also Michael Juby,
right,
Rhett McLaughlin, Corey Teat, who his father Dan Teat was a passionate Campbell fan,
as was Rhett's dad Jim.
Those two would they were monsters on.
Yes, we know.
They just love those guys. Dan Slessing, like there was just a lot of kids our age that just had a good time. We played together. We played golf. We played basketball. We went swimming. I forgot about the swim team. We had to do the swim team. We didn't particularly enjoy the swim team as we had to have a lot of meets on Saturdays.
Right.
We did it all together, and we just did life together.
That's awesome. Yeah, Brooks, I remember you playing Little League baseball over in Lillington, and early on. And early on when we moved back there in 1989, and let's just say that it was a good value for Campbell to hire me in my position. But one of the baseball players, Mike Adcock, his dad was in charge of the Parks and Rec over in Lillington, and Mike calls up Sean Gleason, who had come back to play on the baseball team after being in the Navy, and said, "Hey, you know anybody who wants to make a little money umpiring baseball games?" And Sean said, "How much?" He says, $25 a game, 4 games a week, Monday and Thursday nights, 2 games each night. And Sean says, that sounds good. And he called me because Sean and I are about the same age, and he'd come back to finish up after being in the Navy, and our Claudia, my wife, and he were buddies, and so that sounded really good. Well, the first game I ever called, balls and strikes, you were pitching, Michael Juby was catching, and we were playing against your team. The red team was playing against the green team, and in that green team was Dan and his son Corey, and maybe Benny Enzor, who ended up teaching at Harnett Central High School. Actually taught our son shop before our son Oliver took classes with Benny. Well, you would have thought between Dan and Jim that I was wearing a black and white striped shirt running up and down the court and call. Where was that call? They were giving me the what for, and here the hardest thing in sports, I believe, is calling balls and strikes, and especially when it's Little League, when the strike zone is tough to come by to start with. But I will always think about that. When you think of Michael Juby, I think of Michael Juby was catching, Brooks was pitching, and Rhett was on that team and stuff, and just those things like that were amazing. Son of a coach, small town. You went to school across the street, always at practice after school, always around. What was it like having that kind of access, Brooks? I mean,
you don't realize it at the time, but it's every kid's dream, really, to be around college basketball and be able to be at practice, at the games. I mean, I was in the locker room, like it was just incredible, and I loved every second of it. It's shaped my early life and on into the first 10 years of my career in coaching. But as a kid, these guys are heroes to you, and I looked up to those guys, and I'm sure that having a little bratty kid around and practicing in the locker room was probably not the greatest thing for them all the time, but they treated me just very well. And the couple that I really liked when I was younger, that I really remembered, was Brad Childers. He spent a lot of time with me. Like he didn't have to, and he was just very personable and just a very kind person. He you mentioned bouncing the ball at practice. I would get in trouble from time to time during practice when Dad was wanting to make a point, or he needed, quiet in the gym so he could put in a play or have the team's attention to do something. And as a kid, I would be down there shooting on the other end, and the ball would be bouncing. He'd say, "Brooks, hold that ball so let me get through this." So finally, I learned that I couldn't do that. Well, one day, Dad was there was a quiet point in practice where they were going over some things, and I was standing on the sideline with the ball. And Brad Childress walks over, he grabs the ball and pounds it twice, as hard as he can pound it into the floor. Then he pitches it to me and walks away. And then my dad whips his head around and just rips me for hold the ball. I told you to hold that ball. And Brad set the whole thing up, and I'll never forgot that. Sanders Jackson was another one, the Sandman. Just a great guy to me at a young age.
And Brad and you share the similarity, and you're both coaches' kids. So he was around the gym probably, 10 years earlier. He was doing this. Maybe somebody did the same thing to him. Who knows? We'll have to ask them that the next time. Did you know early on that you wanted to pursue that? Did you just love playing? Was it something that you thought? When did you think, man, I could play basketball. Maybe I could coach basketball. I mean, what was do you have any recall about that?
I didn't really get serious about specializing in basketball until probably first year of high school, maybe sophomore year of high school. Growing up, we played everything. There were no specialized sports. And when it was baseball season, you played. Soccer season, you had to be on the team. Swim team, the counties, the towns counting on you. You need to be there. We need to have enough people for the team. So you did it all. But as I got older, I realized that, basketball was important to me. I loved it. I liked being around the guys and seeing the, just the college game. And at that point, I really, focused hard on working out to make myself the best player I could be to ultimately, hopefully, give myself an opportunity to play in college. As far as coaching, once I got into high school, probably my senior year, I was pretty sure that I wanted to coach. I knew I wasn't going to be good enough to obviously play professional basketball, so I wanted to coach. And obviously seeing Dad do it his whole life and all the great coaches that came through the program, I had just a lot of great people in front of me that I learned from. And I respected them. I generally just, they were heroes to me. I looked up to them, and that I wanted to be like them. So that kind of shaped my early career path as I got into it.
You come from an athletic family. Obviously, your dad played college basketball and got into coaching. Your mom, Shirley, her father, Ray, Major League Baseball pitcher. I never got to meet him. He passed on. What do you know about him? What about, and then he was a great scout. And I've read, Roger Angel wrote an incredible column about him. That is, I've got a collection of his baseball stories that's about Ray Scarborough. What do you tell me about? What you know about your grandfather on your mom's side.
Well, I'd love to see those articles or those stories, but I was young when he passed away, so I don't have a lot of memories of him. But I do feel like I know him based on some of the things that you just said, through the stories I've heard, through the articles that are written. We have a lot of his baseball gear, his uniforms, his bats, the World Series rings from the 52 Yankees and the 70, I believe it was the 70, the Orioles when he was a scout there. And it's a treasure to have those things. But everybody that I've ever talked to speaks very highly of him. But they start with his character, and then they get on to him as a baseball player and a hunter and fisherman. But I'm proud of him and his career and the life he lived. And I wish that I had the opportunity to get to know him more, and I wish I was older. But he left a legacy that I'm definitely proud of.
Sure. So, not only are you there at practice, growing up. And through high school, but you are, like you mentioned, in the locker room. You're on the bus. You're on the trips with the team. I remember early on, I came back to work in 1989, and at that time you were still in grade school, right? And so you were always on the trips. And I was sitting there thinking, my parents would never let me miss school to go to a basketball game if it was an overnight trip at Radford or Winthrop or something like that in the middle of the week. But you had a lab in front of you. What do you remember about the trips, being on the bus and things like that, Brooks?
The first thing I remember about those trips are that before every trip, Mom would let me go to the shortstop and get a snack bag. I don't know why that sticks out, but I would get the caramels and some candy, and then that would be my bag for the trip. And I remember just kind of being just on the bus and walking up and down the aisles and probably sticking my nose where it didn't belong a time or two. But the guys were great, and it was just like being in awe of, you get to watch these guys run up and down the court, and when you're in grade school, like those are the heroes of your time. And I loved every second of it.
In the season, you're with the team, you're with the, you're seeing the competition, and in many ways it felt like there was demonstrations of camaraderie. There were some, I know there were some teams and coaches that maybe your dad didn't see eye to eye with, but there were a lot of people that he competed against and that he'd played with. Like Dan Kinney, who had been with him at Pembroke, then took over at Pembroke and then got the job at Winthrop. What do you have any memories of that, of coaches together, and maybe some of that spilled over into the basketball camp and being around folks like that?
Yeah, those memories came from camp, because all those guys were a fraternity, coaching fraternity, and they were buddies. So they would come to camp in the summer, and I remember John Lentz, Bob Burke, Ron Levency, Rick Waldron, all the guys who were college coaches would come into the camp to sweat with the kids in the gym and teach defense and rebounding, and you just don't find that anymore these days. But that goes to show you the relationships that they all had, and to spend a couple weeks of your summer in Buies Creek is a pretty significant commitment during the summer. And I'm grateful that they were there, because they taught us a lot of basketball.
Well, we've talked about the history of the camp, and you were involved on a panel last fall talking about that in conjunction with the release of the camp documentary. But you think about people like John Wooden coming across from all the way to Buies Creek from UCLA because he was friends with Fred McCall, and Press Maravich having an affinity for that place. And I remember reading about Press and the fact that when he was at Clemson, and I couldn't fathom this, when he was coaching at Clemson in the early 60s, after the game, the coach from the other team, they would invite him over to their house because maybe they weren't driving home till the next morning. And they'd sit there and Press's wife, Helen, would have some coffee and maybe some cake, and they'd sit there and talk basketball right after they'd been sitting there coaching against each other. And knowing college basketball that I've observed it from an insider since the 80s, that is rare. And even now it seems like it's probably not going to happen because somebody's going to be worried that somebody's giving away something, or a booster's going to be mad about something. You've been on that side of the the dressing room as well. I mean, could you imagine when you were at any school having your arch rivals coach over after the game?
It wouldn't happen. It's unheard of. It's so competitive and cutthroat now in the coaching world that those opportunities and relationships don't exist in that same way. They're probably different, and they get together in a different way, but not in that way. Remember, at camp, they would devote maybe an hour in the afternoon or so that the coaches would get together and talk hoops. Mm-hmm. They would talk X's and O's, and they would have like a think tank, I think they called it, where all the counselors and the high school and college coaches would get together and talk strategy. And I just think that's great. I mean, that's the way it should be, and that's how you share your knowledge with others and also gain more yourself.
Growing up in North Carolina, as we both did, I was a child of the 70s. You're more a child of the 80s, 90s, and ACC basketball ruled. I was there pre-Hornets and pre-Panthers, and you were there for a lot of that time as well. All of a sudden, you're a kid, and you're at Carter Gym, and in the summer, here comes Rick Fox, here comes Vinny Del Negro, here comes Christian Laettner or Bobby Hurley or anybody else. Before us, Ralph Sampson was there when he was at Virginia in the 70s, and Terry Holland. And as the coach's son, you got a little more access than average Joe Camper, who might have gotten to speak with them, get an autograph, and talk to them a little bit or something like that. Chris Corciani, guys like that. Were you jaw dropping at times with that, or were you exposed to it at such an early age it just felt natural?
I always look forward to those guys coming in, and it was jaw dropping because those are guys you see on TV,
mm-hmm.
And they're the ones in the newspaper and in the media, and at that time, the media just covered a little bit of sports here and there. It wasn't 24-hour news cycle, so
right.
They could you'd see them play in a game, then you wouldn't see them for a while. You'd just hear about them. But when they would come to camp, I mean, it would just be a major event. Like, everybody's excited, everybody's pumped, and these are the guys that you watch on TV couple times a week. And Chris Corciani and also Vinny Del Negro were very good to me and spent time with me. I've always remembered that about them, and that made a big impact on me. But I grew up a Carolina fan, so I always, wanted the Tar Heels to come in. So, Montross and, George Lynch and Derek Phelps, all those guys would come to camp. And, I just couldn't believe that I'm getting the chance to see these guys and to hang out with them and just walk around with them. And I still have, all the autographs and the memorabilia from camp, and picked a lot of pictures too that are very special to me, and I haven't been able to move on from them yet. I still keep them in the closet and look at them from time to time. But it's just a cool thing to look back on. That's the way life was then. You had those opportunities.
I'll never forget your dad telling me one time when this probably was when we were preparing for the NCAA tournament game against Duke, and talked about how he liked Duke growing up and how Duke was so great, with Jeff Mullins. And he says, I was Art Heyman in the driveway. That's what he always said. I was Art Heyman. And because who were you? For me, it was Pistol Pete Maravich or Wes Unseld, depending on where I wanted to be. Who did you pretend to be in the driveway, Brooks, growing up?
Oh, gosh. I pretended to be guys like Brad Childress. I mean, I really did, because those were the guys that I saw and I interacted with. Those Campbell guys meant an awful lot to me, and they shaped those memories for me. My favorite player of all time is John Stockton from the Utah Jazz. As I got into high school, I really followed his career a lot, but he was just a tough, gritty lead guard, point guard that just a tough sucker, and he could pass that ball. So he shaped a lot of my, who I pull for and who I like. Dan Pogue was also, he probably made the biggest impact on me as far as my style of play and how I thought about the game of basketball. And Dan was an excellent passer. He could run the team. He always communicated to the coaching staff as he was on the floor. There was a constant, look back and forth of play calls. And I was in high school at that point in time, so I was really able to pay attention to that. And I'm sure that happened with, the point guards before Dan. But at that time, I was old enough to know it. And I really watched him and studied him. And gosh, he ran the team, and he got the ball to the people that needed it when they needed to have it.
He had a guy named Spinks on that team and a guy named Neely that both were pretty high percentage shooters, Joe Spinks and Scott Neely. It's interesting that you say that about Dan, because you can tell being on the inside, knowing who's got the trust of the coaching staff. And I recall from my vantage point, for all those many years sitting between the benches at the scorer's table, I'm watching the game as it's going along, and oftentimes I'm closer to my team's bench. And I recall distinctly times where your dad would hold up a signal for a play, and Dan would look at him and go and shake him off, and then hold something else up, and then your dad would nod at him and change the call, because Dan knew what might have been working at the time. And that's an incredible amount of trust to have right there between your coach and your point guard.
That happened a lot. And Dan that's what I learned from him. And I would also ask Dad, I was like, hey, I saw this interaction. Dan called another play rather than the one that you called, and you were okay with that. Like, what were you thinking? And he's like, I trust Dan to, make the call, and even if it doesn't work out, I want him to know that I trust him to make the call. And that interaction that you talked about has always stuck with me, because that's a point guard and a coach have to have that relationship to really be in sync and to run the team. And Dan had that respect from Dad and the coaching staff and the whole team.
Brooks, you mentioned freshman year of high school is when you started to focus on basketball. Take us through a little bit about your recruiting, your recruitment time. Campbell and High Point were not in the same league at the time. They pretty much developed a healthy hatred is maybe a hard word, but a healthy rivalry in the 12 years that Campbell was back in the Big South recently, and that a lot of programs are still think about it. Tell me about your recruitment, and then what led you to go to High Point.
So I was we went to the High Point team camp, high school basketball team camp every summer when I was in high school. And when you go to a college's team camp, you get to play in front of their coaches for a week. And I did that for 4 years. And D. Sasser was the assistant coach at High Point University that recruited me. And he was the first person to offer me a scholarship, and he stayed in touch with me. He wrote me handwritten letters. He really recruited me and made me feel like he wanted me to be there. And that always made a big impact on me, that the respect I have for Coach Sasser was a large reason why I chose High Point. Barton was a school that I seriously considered with Coach Levency. And also at the end, UNC Asheville and Coach Biedenbach came in the picture late. And Campbell was always there as well. And Dad said, look, hey, I want you to be here. I want you to be on the team. He said, but you've got to make this decision on your own. He said, I'm going to support you, and Mom too. We're going to support you to make the best decision that you want to make. Ultimately, I really thought it would be best if I got out of Buies Creek to play college basketball. I wanted to kind of prove that I could do it on my own without being at Campbell, to just get away and have my own space and have my own career. I didn't have intentions on transferring back. I thought I would be at High Point for 4 years. But it just, after 2 years, it just wasn't the right fit for me. Coach Jerry Steele, he was the head coach there, a legend in the world of college basketball, won a ton of games.
Bones McKinney's assistant coach with the Carolina Cougars, and was at Guilford College for years. I mean, what a legend is a very appropriate term.
And he was an old school coach as you could get. And it was just the time I spent there, I learned a lot, but it just wasn't the right fit for me. I've got some great Coach Steele stories that are just really unbelievable. But at the end of that 2 years, I just decided that I wanted to transfer. I wanted to go somewhere else. At that time, I had not made up my mind that Campbell was where I was going to go. But after I made that decision and had a couple months to go through thinking about it, that's ultimately what I thought was the best thing, and wanted to come back home and play for Campbell, the team I grew up with, and just all the feelings and the sentiment I have for the Fighting Campbells, I wanted to play.
Well, how about sharing a Jerry Steele story with us? The one that sticks out in my mind is an old Carter gym. There wasn't a lot of room to get away from anything, and I'll never forget, the visitors' locker room was at the end where there was stands in the end zone, and I walk out at halftime, and I don't know if I was going over to make copies over in my old office across the little parking lot there or something like that. Coach Steele sitting outside having a cigarette. And this was well into halftime. I don't know if he'd already talked to y'all or not, but what is your go-to Jerry Steele story that you can share with us?
Man, there's so many. He smoked those cigarettes all the time, in practice, on the bus, in the locker room. Like, it was old school now. Like, I mean, he's just smoking right there in practice, walking around. One of the stories that I remember is he would, in the second half of games, sometimes when the game would get close, we were playing the last couple minutes, the game's coming down the stretch, and, I'm the point guard on the team, so I'm looking over to the coaching staff to get the next calls and see what do we want to do here on defense? We got a free throw coming. What do we want to do? Well, I look over and Coach Steele in there. And so I ran over to the bench, and Coach Sasser, he had a smile on his face. And I said, Coach, where's Coach Steele? And he said, well, he said he had to go outside and smoke a cigarette and that we could finish this thing up. I said, you have got to be kidding me. I've never seen anything like that before. We went on to win the game, and he never mentioned it. He never said anything about it. It was just like it never happened. And that happened a couple more times, and I told my dad about it, and he did not believe me. He said, Brooks, there is no way that Coach Steele is not on the bench at the end of the game. And I said, Dad, okay, I don't know what to tell you. He's not there. So Dad came to watch us play at Erskine.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, game's coming down the wire, 4, 5, 6 minutes left, and Coach leaves the game. And, we go on down the stretch, we win the game, and after the game, I go talk to Dad, and he's like, he said, I've never seen anything like it. I've just never seen anything like it. But that's how he would leave and say, all right, you guys know what to do. Go ahead and do it. We didn't do a whole lot of scouting reports. Mm-hmm. We didn't do a whole lot of weight training. It was more, hey, we're going to do what we do best. We're going to go out and play, and we're not going to spend our time focusing on what other people do. We want to be good at what we do, was his philosophy. Another time, another quick one, on the road, he's a big man, mm-hmm. and he's got 3 fingers on his right hand. They got chopped off in a lawnmower, 2 of them. Mm-hmm. So after practice, we're on the road. He said, all right, bring your laundry to my room and bring your laundry bag to my room, and we'll get it washed up and ready for tomorrow. Well, I go knock on his door, and he opens the door, and he's standing there in his tighty whities with his cigarette in his hand where he's got those 2 fingers chopped off, and he just got this big smile. And he says, hey, buddy. And then he said, just hang around the corner and watch everybody else's reaction as they come to the door. He was always doing stuff that was funny or just different. He was just a different guy. And he was a great guy to play for, and I have great memories of him, and I can tell 1,000 stories of Coach Steele.
Well, and certainly the fact that they didn't do extensive scouting reports was not the way that you had been trained coming up, because that is one thing that your dad was breaking down the other team, especially what they were going to do and how to stop them.
And that was important to me. That was the side of playing and coaching that I gravitated towards, and I felt like that I was strong in. If I could think my way around the game, that gave me an advantage.
Sure.
I wasn't the biggest, I wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but if I could think my way around, I could make up some of those gaps. And Coach Steele, we didn't do that. And that was important. Mm-hmm. So that was a contributing factor.
Brooks, your sophomore year, High Point comes to play at Campbell, and everybody's making a big deal out of it. Campbell had started off the year going off and playing at Wake Forest, and they had Darius Sangaila, and your dad and Coach Odom had a great relationship and played Wake a whole lot. But that game was coming up in Carter Gym, and everybody had it circled because the hometown guy was coming home to play. And quite frankly, that's when High Point was making its move. They had just recently joined Division I, and everybody at Campbell thought, well, we're going to take care of these Panthers. Well, for the folks who weren't there, High Point had a 6'10" Australian guy named Jordy Cullen, who was really good, and they had a point guard named Brooks Lee that knew where the ball needed to go. And the Panthers walked out of there. I believe it was an 18-point victory. And Brooks got to sit and watch the last couple minutes while the reserves played. What do you remember about that night and that game? And it just felt like everything went right for your team and that whole evening. And how was it surreal playing in Carter Gym against Campbell? Or, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was, there's a lot of emotions to describe that game. It is obviously a big game for me personally. Like I wanted to win that game and I wanted to play well. Obviously the people from Buies Creek being there that I grew up with that supported me, I knew it was going to be a big game. Everybody was going to be there, and they wanted to see kind of how I've been doing. But going into that game, I remember Coach Steele pulled me to the side a couple days before, and he said, I can appreciate that this game puts you in a tough spot with your dad being a coach for Campbell. And he said, I'm not going to ask you anything that Campbell does, what they run, how they do it. He said, I would never put you in that position. He said, just go out there and play your best, play as hard as you can play, and the result will take care of itself. And I always respected him for saying that. Mm-hmm. But I went into that game, I knew Campbell's offense, front to back. Adam Fellers was a big part of it. And they did a lot of stuff. They ran a lot of stuff for him to shake him loose, to get him shots. And I guarded him that night, and I was able to kind of affect and break down some of the defense or some of the set plays they were running that caused some problems for Campbell offensively. But, yeah, we had a really good post player down low, Jordy Cullen, the left-hander, and he was excellent. And if you could just get it to him, he was going to score. Mm-hmm. As the game wore on, in the midst of the game, you don't think about your dad's on the other bench or the emotions involved in it. But as you mentioned, I came out at the end, and it wasn't the best feeling to win that game. Mm-hmm. Because, yeah, you win the game yourself and your team, but you also beat your dad. Mm-hmm. And during that time in college basketball, you don't want to lose. Nobody wants to lose a game. Right. And I was very sensitive to that, but it was a game that I personally wanted to play well, and I wanted our team to win. But I didn't want my dad to be on the other end of that, but there was no way to avoid it. Thankfully, we won the game, and we were able to get out of there with a W out of Carter Gym. But the thing that really is important to me about that is playing in Carter Gym. Like that, I grew up in that gym. I still have the key in my bedroom to the gym door that I had when I was in high school. And I've just spent countless hours in there, and that made me a player. And just to be able to go back in there for the very first time to play a game was very special, because you know when you're in there in high school, you're in there by yourself. You're wondering what it would be like. I was a ball boy for all the games. And then when you finally step back in there to play, there was a lot of emotion involved.
Brooks, you mentioned you decided to leave High Point after 2 years. What was it that ultimately drew you to come back home and play at Campbell? Because you'd been the starting point guard for 2 years. You on a up and coming team that had a good amount of success. I'm sure there were more people that would like to have you, but what was it that ultimately brought you home?
And that's exactly what Coach Steele told me when I had the talk with him that I wanted to transfer. He said, "You're getting a lot of playing time here as a young player." He said, "I want you to go home and think about it a couple more days." He said, "I'm not ready to take your answer on that." But really, what was important to me is I wanted to be somewhere that I fit the program, that I fit what we were doing offensively, what we were doing defensively, and my skill set could be utilized. And I knew that Campbell's a place that I could do that, just because, Dad and the coaching staff, they ran a lot of good stuff on offense that was intricate and cutting edge offensive strategies. And I wanted to do that. Those things interested me, that it fit my skill set. And ultimately that was, the reason that I chose to come back to Campbell.
A few years before, you were on the bus, on the plane with the team, going places. That first road trip, did it stick out? Here you are in the warm up. You're not in the T-shirt with the towel, as a kid, or not hanging out at the end of the bench or whatever, but you're going through warm-ups. What does that stick out in your mind at all, or any bits like that?
It really doesn't. I don't have like an aha moment on that because I had to redshirt when I transferred. I had to sit out a year, so that year kind of brought me back to reality and got me settled down. Also had a stress fracture in my foot that year and had to have a surgery. So it really, I was able to watch everything, see everything, where I wasn't as that shock factor that I would have been if it were today's time and you can come in and play right away. But yeah, wearing the orange and black was, something that was always going to be special for me. And when I made that decision, it's, something that really kind of had been setting itself up, I felt like, for my whole life.
You move back to Buies Creek and you're with the team, and it's funny the things you think about when you look back on stuff. And I'm not a card player. I mean, I like playing games, but I've just never really been much of a card player. And I remember being on the bus with different teams at times, and sometimes back in the day in the 90s, the baseball team loved to play cards. They may still like to, but there'd be 3 or 4 games going on up and down the aisles. But I especially remember traveling with the basketball team when you were there, because Mike Vaccaro, my roommate, who's been now the radio voice down here at UNCW for 20 years, you and Brad McKeever and Mike and Adam Fellers would sit. Y'all were always kind of set up a little bit closer to the front, and y'all had a card game going from the moment it felt like you got on the bus. And it was a big to-do if the bus had to slam on the brakes and something got up, and y'all played euchre, I think it was, all the time. So I'm going to count on you to be honest and tell us who's the best card player among the 4 of y'all.
I think Mikey V gets that title since he introduced this game called euchre to we had never heard of it. We didn't know what it was. We just knew we had a long bus ride ahead of us, and we needed something to pass the time. And Mikey V would bring his cards out, and he educated us on how to play, and then once we got it going, and we would get competitive with it, and then we looked forward to it.
Right.
Like we would talk trash about it during the week and say, can't wait for the road trip. It was just that camaraderie you get with teams being on the bus and, on the road with people.
How about just a quick most memorable arena that you got to play in college? I mean, because, Campbell, High Point, they get to go play some big places, or something that was significant to you for another reason?
I'd say, oddly enough, UNLV. We played when I was at High Point. Mark Dickel was the point guard there, and Kaspers Kambala was the center. And those guys pressed us for 40 minutes, and we probably we laughed about it, like the hand checking that was going on, like we weren't ready for that. Like it was just eye-opening how physical those guys were, and they put their hand on you and move you 3 feet, and I had not seen that before, and just how big and strong and physical they were. And that was I think maybe my freshman year, so I was new to high-level basketball. Obviously I've seen it, but once you get out there and you run into somebody, you can feel that. Also, I remember playing at Florida with Teddy Dupay and was it Haslam and Big Jelly? Maybe
Udonis Haslam.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. He knocked. I had to come off of a stagger screen. I was defending Dupay on a stagger screen. I'll never forget it. Dupay got the ball and he faced up, and I guess I was too close to him. He ripped the ball through and caught me right on the temple and knocked me out. And I woke up in the emergency room in the hospital. So that was my memory at Florida. But I remember they called the starting lineups. And when they call you out, the whole student section would say Gator bait and then like chomp their hands. And the whole place did it in unison. They were right there on top of you. And the environment there was probably the best. But my most memorable was just how physical college basketball was at UNLV.
you were with your dad for a year as a red shirt, and in on all the meetings and practicing when you could. What was it like as a college athlete playing for your father? And was there additional pressure that you felt or anything like that, or what? What was that like?
It was difficult. It was difficult for him and me as well. There's a certain standard that he has to set, that he can't show favoritism to me, and he had to be tough on me. And he when he was, and that those times challenged our relationship at the time, ultimately in a good way. But it was, there were some tense moments there. But there were also a lot of great moments, because he and I had that same type relationship that Dan Pogue and he had. Mm-hmm. So we were able to work together on a lot of offensive, defensive calls and strategies and game plans. And we had a very good player-coach relationship. But that dynamic was an interesting one, because he couldn't show favoritism towards me, and I didn't want him to.
The interesting thing is, a lot of people think that, the coach's son's going to shoot all the time. Well, you had a guy that was a pretty good shooter on your team, and the first year you were able to play, your junior year, you led the Atlantic Sun Conference in assists. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you were getting all the looks. But I do remember your dad telling me one thing, because we were talking about Adam Fellers, and is still one of the best long-range shooters that we've ever had, and is as good of a fundamental-looking shot from the release. And he shot from close to half court about the same way as he did. But he said, Adam's got more range, but if you put Brooks's toe right on the line, he's going to hit just as many as Adam does. And I thought that was high praise, and he wasn't trying to say, my son's so great, but he was pointing out to me something that we always didn't see as observers, in the fact, because that wasn't necessarily your first responsibility. It was, you want to get it to Jonte Edwards, you want to get it to Adam Fellers, and I always appreciated that insight, because I'd not, a lot of people that work in a support staff related field that didn't grow up on the deep inside the game. We understand it, but we don't know that. It's like, well, there's different roles, and that was neat for him to share that with me. How about playing in your hometown, Brooks? I mean, you got to wear the orange instead of the purple. What was, and play in front of a lot of people that you grew up with?
It was great. That's just the short answer, and the long answer too. It's great. As a ball boy growing up, I was sitting under the goal on the side with my buddies, and we're wiping up the sweat, and we're watching college basketball live and in person and right up front. And then to get older and have my career progress where I'm able to play on that same court was special. And also playing in front of the people of the community was equally as special for me. And, Jim McLaughlin and Dan Teat and was it Frank Lanier, I believe. Those guys would sit on the front row, and they would get the program from the game, and they would ball it up, and they would absolutely just go after the referees every game. And they did it from an early age when I was a young guy all the way till through when I was playing. And there are no better fans than those three guys that just geared up. At the end of that game, they had to be exhausted from all the hooting and hollering and suggestions they made to the referees to improve upon their performance. They were always entertaining, but they bleed the black and orange. And just to come back and play in front of those guys and the rest of the folks in the community, it sure meant a lot to me.
I'll never forget Mike Vaccaro coining the term, calling those guys the Muppets, in a reference to the guys from the Muppet Show who were up in the box there and were heckling the show and things like that. Because Mike's position was right behind them on the risers there, and the radio position was there, and half the time they'd be standing up and Mike would be looking and he couldn't see what was going on because they were hollering and waving their hands and stuff. But just part of the great atmosphere from the old barn, as we like to call it, the Billy Barn, or what, a Carter Dome, all those nicknames we had for that place that was a horrible place to recruit to, but a great place on game night. That's for sure.
The Fighting Camel Club empowers student athletes to lead with purpose on and off the field. Over the past 3 years, donations to the FCC have helped fund scholarships, facility enhancements, health and wellness improvements, and the greatest needs of the athletics department. With our move to the CAA, the need for your support has never been greater. Memberships begin at just $100 and can get you access to exclusive merchandise and seating. Head to GoCamels.com and hit the Give button.
All right, Brooks, quick little change of pace here. So you get to Campbell summer, the 85-86 school year, and then you graduate in 02, you finish up playing in 03. Can you give me your starting five?
Oh, man.
I asked my golf buddies, what's your ideal foursome to go out and play around the golf with? But can you give me a starting five? And maybe I'll give you a sixth man, because everybody, you got to have some depth, right? Or where does it start?
Wow. Well, obviously I'm going to go Dan Pogue at the point. I'm going to go Neely at the 2. I'm going to bring in Mark Mocknick at the 3. Joe Crash Spinks at the 4. And then at the 5, that's a tough one.
You got a Big South Player of the Year in Henry Wilson.
See,
you got some others.
I didn't play with that. I don't remember those guys, but I know their stats.
Yeah.
So, if I can choose Hank, if I can go back to people that were just before me.
Wow, you're going to go Mocknick over Clarence Greer at the 3. That's it. See, that's the beauty of it. You talk about things over a 20-year span or all-time span. It's great to try to compare the people in between. But when Clarence was there, you were 6, 7 years old. You don't remember that as much. Your dad does.
Yeah.
Brooks, I always like to ask this question to former student athletes, and it's a great question to people who went into coaching as well. But what kind of advice would you give to an incoming freshman on a Campbell basketball team or any student athlete?
Well, times sure have changed since when I was there. So that my advice is probably going to be a little outdated with all the NIL stuff and the transfer portal and all that stuff that thankfully I didn't have to deal with or go through. But really, the best thing you can do is just come in and play hard, buy into the program that you've chosen to go play for, and be the best teammate that you can be. All the while that you've got a clock that's ticking. And when you've got something that doesn't last forever, you got to treat it special. You've got 4 years to get it done. You got 4 years to play. So it's got a shelf life. So you really given everything you have, from preparation to workouts, obviously gameplay, but really leaving nothing in the tank, because once it's over, and you can't get it back. So when you're dealing with something that doesn't last forever, I think you have to treat it differently, and I think college athletics certainly fits into that.
Before we move into your shift into coaching career, anything else we're missing talking about your time in Buies Creek or at Campbell, or that you wanted to share?
Yeah, there was one time before when I was playing at Campbell. There was a day that I wasn't going to be able to practice due to injury or sickness. I can't remember exactly what the reason was, but the decision had been made that I was not going to practice that day. So Dad wanted to use that as an opportunity. And he said, look, I need you to get through some warm-ups. And he's like, then I'll handle it from there. And he said, we're going to do this thing. I know you don't need to practice. You're sick or hurt or whatever it may be, but I need you to get through the early part of it. So I did. And I was standing on the sideline. The first drill started. And at that point in time, we were struggling defensively. Mm-hmm. So Dad and the coaching staff were really excited about defense and really trying to hammer home some points. Well, Tark Johnson was a teammate of mine during that particular year. And Tark was a great athlete, great player. He was a good one-on-one player that really we didn't have a whole lot of that on our teams, and he was good at that. But Dad really wanted to make a point about Tark's defense and our team's defense that day. So we were in a drill. I was not in the drill. I was on the sideline, and Tark missed a block out. And so Dad blows the whistle, and he absolutely goes crazy. He has an explosion. I can't believe we're missing blockouts. We got to get better at that. Just really going. Then he kicks me out of practice. He says, Brooks, if this is the type of leadership that you're gonna allow on this team, to have your teammates not be able to block out, then just get out. Just go up there and sit in the stands and watch, because that's all you're giving us right now. So everybody just stops. And this was the point that he, the motivational tactic that he was going to use. And I knew it. I knew it was coming. So I went and sat in the front row on the bleachers. So the drill continues, and Tark misses another block out. He blows the whistle and Brooks, if this is what you're going to let him do, just go to the locker room. Just get out of here. You're giving us nothing. And if this is the leadership that you're giving us, there's nothing we can do with you today. So just get out. And everybody was just eyes wide open and mouth dropped. But he was able to use that to prove a point, hey, we need to block out. And it made an impact on Tark because he felt bad that he got me in trouble. And Tark was my buddy. And he did not want to let me down. So I'm sure the rest of that practice and moving forward, he got his blockouts, and he improved defensively. But that was a time he used that to help make that point.
You move into the coaching ranks, and your eyes were wide open. You knew what was going on and what you grew up in the game, and you knew the realities of it. And you go to UNCG and East Carolina and UNCW. Take us a little bit through that, and what the great parts about it and the not so great, maybe, Brooks.
Yeah. So growing up, I wanted to coach. I saw Dad do it, and I saw all his assistants do it, and that's what I wanted to do with my career, and my job was coach college basketball. Once I got out of college and my eligibility was up and I was making that decision, Dad actually tried to talk me out of that. Wow. He said, look, I know this is what you want to do. He said, but I don't recommend that you do this. He's like, it's a hard life. It's very difficult. And he said, but if you choose that you want to do it, he's like, I'll help you. I'll support you, and I'll help, do all I can. Great words of wisdom. Wish I would have taken that advice. It took me 10 years to figure it out, but ultimately I did. So I got my first job at Wofford College with Coach Mike Young, who's at Virginia Tech now.
Yes.
Coach Young was a not first-year coach, but he was early on in his career there. And he was a very good offensive coach, and I learned a lot from him. But I took that job. I was, at the time, you could have 3 full-time assistants. I don't know what you can have now, but I was one of the full-time assistants. I could coach, I could recruit, I could be on the floor in timeouts, all the things that a Division I coach could do, except that position was not paid.
Wow.
It was strictly a volunteer financial position. So I worked at a storage company in Spartanburg, South Carolina, from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. every day, and then went over to Wofford to the office and did basketball stuff. Because it wasn't a paid position, they gave me a room to live in the Days Inn. That's where they had some students, the Days Inn Motel. And halfway through the year, that hotel got condemned. It was such a dump that they condemned it. And so they had to do something with the students. So they're putting them back in dorms, and they're finding places for them to go. Well, they put me in a garage behind the president's house that they made into some sort of efficiency place to live. So you could take a shower, use the restroom, and cook your eggs on the stove all in the same 3-foot little area.
Oh, wow.
So I'm in this garage, and after being there a couple weeks, a squirrel dies in the vent in one of the pipes of the garage. So it starts to really have this horrible, horrible smell. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Folks, this is stuff you can't make up.
So I've gone from the Days Inn to the garage, and now I'm in a position where I don't want to be a burden to Coach Young.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to say, hey, Coach, I know you got me out of the Days Inn, and now I need you to get me out of the garage and find me somewhere else. I just didn't want to put that burden on him. I was appreciative of my opportunity, and I just didn't want to bother him with it. So what I did was I would sleep in the laundry room in the dorm, in the pull-out thing where you fold your clothes. For a couple months, I would slip in there at night, and that's where I slept. Towards the end of the season, that's when that happened. And then I looked for a job fairly aggressively at that point.
And you went from there to, was UNCG with Mike Dement?
I went from Wofford to East Carolina.
East Carolina first, yeah.
There with Bill Harrion.
Mm-hmm.
Then went to UNC Greensboro for 2 years with Mike Dement.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was at UNC Wilmington for 5 years, a couple with Benny Moss and then a couple with Buzz Peterson.
Right. What was it that, what was it that it ultimately made you decide, hey, you know what, maybe we'll try something else?
It was the cutthroat nature of coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I discovered that, and I knew it, but I wasn't getting out of it what I was putting into it.
Right.
Like I felt like no matter how hard I worked or how good of a job I did, I wasn't going to be rewarded for that job. Like you just have to get so lucky to advance and improve and get your next job, and then move 2 years later and get your next job. And I just was no longer okay with the loyalty of college athletics and assistant coaches being a one-way street.
Mm-hmm.
And I really got burned out with that. And I wanted to know if I put this type of effort into play in the business world, what could happen? If I went out and worked hard and I did a good job and I was successful in my job, what would I stand to benefit from that? And I felt like I wanted that opportunity to get out of something, what I'm putting into it. And so ultimately, I made the decision to step away from it, which I never thought I'd be in a position to do it, but really the grind and just how cutthroat it was drove me away.
Well, tell us about your career arc now that you're working with your cousin Garrett, who played college basketball. And I've always found it interesting that people who played athletics or got into coaching would be really good in the business side, because recruiting is sales, right? And selling your program and then convincing maybe your ownership, who are your owners or whatever, the people on your team, convincing them to work in a certain way. There's management there too. It all kind of. Do you see your coaching career? How is that translated into your career in business now?
It's parallels all over the place, just like you described. And I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know much about the business world. I just knew that I had the skill set that I had. I worked hard. I would recruit hard. I would develop relationships. And so Garrett Blackwelder, the owner of the company I worked for, and my first cousin, he said, look, I want you to be in sales for us. And I said, Garrett, I don't know how to sell anything. I said, I've never done that. And he said, you do that every day of your life. He said, when you go recruit players, you're selling yourself and your university to the player and his family. Mm-hmm. There's no bigger commitment that a family can make besides saying, hey, here's my son. I'm going to trust you to be a part of looking after him for the next 4 years of his life. So when he explained it that way, that made sense to me. And there has been a lot of parallels. I'm fortunate to be able to lead a sales team where he lets me run it like a college basketball program. And that sounds weird, and I can break down how that works, but it's truly been a blessing to be able to take my competitive basketball career and coaching abilities that I had there, the skill set I had, and bring that into the business world and see success with it. But yeah, at the time I had no clue until it kind of hit me in the face.
And the business has grown. Tell us a little bit about it. You were over near Greenville for a while, where the business originated, right? And now you've moved to Wilmington and operating the business out of here.
That's right. So I worked for a company called Grover Gaming and our sister company Vanilla Games, and I'm the chief sales officer for both of those companies. And our company started in Greenville. And in 2003, Garrett started it, and now we have 430 employees throughout all the states that we cover. But essentially, we're a software company that we make digital gaming solutions and products for lotteries and casinos. And we go out and we sell that product in the states that we're able to sell it in. And we have a customer base that we're recruiting. We're trying to establish good relationships with, good rapport. And it's truly been a remarkable rise in this company, and I'm so proud of the job that Garrett's done and thankful that I've been along for the ride.
Brooks, everybody that has been around Buies Creek for decades knows about how much your dad loves Carolina beach music, and he never made never was missed an opportunity to share how much he enjoyed that. Tell us a little bit about how your interest in Carolina beach music started, and you've had some side gigs as a DJ. You've got a beautiful 1950s era jukebox with 45 records in it from that decade. Tell us a little bit about how that started and your passion for that.
Sure. So growing up, Mom and Dad always played what I thought at the time was like oldies music. And it was obviously some beach music mixed in there as well, but that's just the kind of music that they liked. And Dad really liked it and enjoyed it, but I didn't think much of it and really didn't pay much attention to it. I kind of liked it a little bit, but never thought too much about it. The summer of my senior year in college, I was at a little honky-tonk called the Crab Pot in Surf City, North Carolina on Topsail Island. And there was a guy in there that was shag dancing, and he danced all night. He danced with every gal in the place. And I was just like, man, I want to learn how to do that. Like, that looks like a lot of fun and something I'd really like to do. Well, he helped me learn how to dance. He taught me how to shag. And through that, I was able to discover that I really have a passion and enjoyment for 1950s rhythm and blues, obviously, oddly enough. So the more I heard it, the more it made sense. And that music really just resonates with me and makes sense to me. So I collect vinyl records, 45s. And that's a lot of what we shag to is 1950s rhythm and blues. And because of that, I've started to DJ a little bit here and there. I'll do it a couple times a year. We'll drag in our turntables and our 45 boxes, and we'll play a couple nights a year. But it's just been a lot of fun. I've made a lot of good friends and so just lasting relationships in the shag world.
You grew up going to Topsail Island. You've shared with me, and a story I like to share with people that happened a couple of summers ago is my mother-in-law lives at Topsail, and my wife Claudia and our daughter Catherine and I, we were going to the Crab Pot one evening for dinner, and we walk in and there's Brooks Lee, and we'd seen him a little bit earlier that day, and we're in and the Crab Pot is a great earthy spot. It's concrete floors, but you want to talk about great seafood and steam, and I believe it's an awesome atmosphere, authentic and everything. Well, there's always a wait there in the summertime, and so Catherine and I went in to get a cold drink while we were waiting, and we go to pay the bartender, And the bartender looks at me and says, "Oh, that's already taken care of." And I look up, I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, and she looks over there and points across the room, and there's Brooks Lee smiling. And I said, and I wave over at Brooks. And I said, "No, that's okay. Thank you. That's all right. We got it." And he looked at that bartender, and he looked at her, pointed his finger, says, "You don't take his money." And she says, "You heard him." And we got to talking, and that's when I went over there afterward and thanked Brooks for our drinks. And I said, "How long have you been coming here?" He says, "All my life." And so, you want to talk about a guy that's a head honcho in Topsail Beach. This is the guy right there, and I will never forget that. And what a beautiful moment that was for me. And that moment for Catherine, because every time we go there, and she goes there all the time when she goes to meet her grandmother. Her grandmother goes there to eat 4 or 5 times a week between lunch and dinner. And Catherine always goes in there and tells me, "You're not paying for that drink. You don't take his money." Brooks, last fall, you came back to Buies Creek and were part of a panel discussion surrounding the release of the Campbell Basketball School documentary. And there were people in there from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s of the golden days of the Campbell Basketball School. You sat on a panel with the likes of your dad, who was the director for close to 20 years and worked Campbell basketball camp before that when he was at UNCP. And then legendary Campbell coach Wanda Watkins. What was that like? And then tell me just, some of the things that you like to share with people when they talk to you, ask you about the basketball school.
I was very nervous to be on that panel. I didn't know if there was a raffle or a drawing that I won or lost to get in that seat with that crowd that I was with. But no, the basketball camp was always something we looked forward to every summer as kids. All the guys that I've mentioned, Michael Juby, Reb McLaughlin, Ben Thomas, Garrett, my cousin, we all look forward to the summers and having camp. I mean, where else can you go play ball all day with your buddies? You could order pizza at night and take your pizza to your dorm room with your buddies and just hang out. It was just an opportunity you didn't get and that you look forward to. I mean, I remember the camp store, the camp bank. I think your wife was working the bank. She always made sure to count my money for me and help me out. She was very good to me. But it's those things and those people that, we just enjoyed it so much. Something simple as we can order a pizza today and then go sit in a room and eat it together and hang out. As a kid, you just, those sort of things you remember.
To be up there and to have folks like Clarence Greer come back and say that, and Johnny Marshbanks was in the room, and then Rhonda Mueller Langdon Johnson was there, and Mary Weiss, and so many of these people that you had seen through the years. And then to look up on the screen and see the interviews with Coach Danny Roberts, who had passed away previously, and then to see Jerry Smith, who ended up passing away this past fall. There is it's hard for me to put in words, but do you feel like a bit of history being a part of that, because you grew up as a kid with it, and then as a high school student, and then you were a camp counselor and a coach as an undergraduate? Do you feel like you got the full experience of that and just some of the greatest times?
Yeah, it's definitely humbling to be a part of that night and watch that video tribute that was very well done. It just shows the history of Campbell and Buies Creek, and you just wouldn't think that Buies Creek would have that type of history in it. And it's really cool to be a part of that, and to have been fortunate enough to be able to live through all the stages of it, from a camper to a counselor to a player. I was able to really live that. I have a picture that I don't know how I got it, but it's from Pistol Pete when he would do his ball handling drills and exhibition in Carter Gym. And it's just, the people are packed in there. The kids are just they're just watching every move he makes. And that picture is just, man, I can't describe what it means to me. And then as I was a child in camp, Austin Lehman would come in there and do his drills. I think George did it before him, but I remember Austin. And he never missed a shot. Like he talked to us as campers for 45 minutes while he's doing his ball handling and all the while he's shooting, and just never missed a shot. And it's just remarkable, like to see that happen and to live through it. But all the people that you mentioned they're the pioneers that made it happen. And just I don't think you realize how important the things that you're doing are when you're in the moment, because in the moment it's not probably that big of a deal, but as you look back on what you've done, it is a huge deal. And those people that you mentioned are legends in Campbell basketball and Buies Creek itself.
Finally, Brooks, can you put into words how Campbell University and the Buies Creek community have impacted your life?
No. I don't think that I can, but I will try. I mean, really, Buies Creek has shaped me as a person. It's helped define the foundation of my faith. It's given me friendships. It's given me mentors and heroes, and just a way to grow up that has given me the opportunity to have success in life, strictly because of the way that I was raised and the people I was raised around. And not everybody gets that opportunity, and I'm certainly grateful for it. And the older I get, the more I think about that, just how thankful I am to my parents for everything that parents do, all the stuff they put up with, the money they spent on me, the lessons they taught me, but also the other people in the community did those same things. And it really is a community where everybody helps each other. And to grow up that way, you just felt you felt safe. You felt like you were having a great life, and it just set me up to have my best crack at life that I can possibly have. And I know a lot of people don't get that opportunity, and I'm sure grateful that the Creek gave it to me.
I'm Stan Cole, and our guest today on Tales from the Creek has been Campbell basketball standout Brooks Lee. Thank you, Brooks, for sharing your Tales from the Creek.
Thank you, Stan.